got, we're going to talk about colleges and universities and how they fit into the smart cities concept, I suppose. So we're going to have Denda, Brian Wolff, Sara Blouch, and Bob Harkins are going to take the podium now, and see how this goes. All right, Bob Harkins.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here, and it certainly has been a very full morning as we've gotten an opportunity to do a lot of things and understand a lot of things about smart cities or self-aware connected cities. When John and I talked about putting this together, what we started with was the concept of, first of all, talking about research. What does the research tell us, and try and keep driving back to what the research is going to tell us. Dale's going to talk to that. Then we tried to look at today's technology. Brian's going to talk to that. And then finally, an example of what a university is doing at the Ohio State University. So we're off and going this morning. That's the panel makeup. For clarity, and to start out with, what we have had in all the discussions is trying to get an understanding of what smart city is, what it is. And what we tried to do is to define it that a smart city has a lot of different aspects, and I think from what Las Vegas just demonstrated, the connectivity and the interconnection of those connective pieces are very important. We see it as a technological city, much centering on data, and then the big question is, how do we manage that data? You saw from Las Vegas all the amounts of data that they collect and what they're able to do with it. For the parking industry, there's been a lot of concern about autonomous vehicles. Now autonomous vehicles are going to drive the parking industry out of sight and shrink us. I think that what we tried to look at is, we're not about trying to reduce the size of parking, but trying to figure out how to manage the parking and the traffic that we've got in the near future, what the impact's going to be on our infrastructure and how we're going to do that. And then the final piece is to stay connected for information for transit and all the other modes of transportation. So first up, Dale, what's the research tell us?
You have a question for me?
I do.
In some specificity?
Thank
you. Can you hear me?
Go ahead. So can you tell us, first of all, what the population movements look like?
Sure. Thank you. The question points directly to, and I want to preface my comments, to the current narrative in the industry, which frankly is distorted. It's a narrative of impending decline or softening of parking demand in general by one or other causes, generally described as a generational shift, a conflux with technology that is going to result in less vehicle ownership and use as we've known it for traditionally. And this narrative says, well, we have to prepare for the future, it's disruptive, and we have to, the premise is that we have to get ready to downsize. And we have to do things differently tomorrow, because tomorrow is going to be smaller than yesterday. And let me tell you something. In our research, in these selected findings, and I have just a few minutes, we found nothing, virtually nothing, to support that narrative. If you take it from another perspective, the internal logic of that narrative, it cannot explain rising parking demand in the work commute. It cannot explain where people are living and working. It can't explain car buying patterns. It can't explain $5.6 billion construction market in 2017 for parking garages. So it's rather just levitating out there. It's a free-floating argument of decline with nothing holding it up. I've got a few minutes to talk about that to see how we can understand what's really happening. This slide is interesting. If you're into numbers, if you're into statistics, we reduce the entire population, essentially, of 327 million people in the United States down to density by neighborhood and area by households. And we grouped them, or this researcher, Jared Kokel, very, very bright guy, has grouped to denser urban areas at 19%, which, by the way, include about 63 million people, okay? Yet, if you look at the suburban, in decreasing density as we move from off to the left, we have about another 180 million people. And then we have the rural, of course, which is outside of today's discussion. So it's really an interesting reduction of how population patterns have caused, where people live over the last 25 years, essentially. And you can see there are incremental changes. And we're referencing the far right yellow bar. And of course, the reasons and cause are rather intuitive. Cost of living preference, necessity, growing family. If I have a family and the schools are not acceptable in the urban setting, I'm not going to be in the urban setting, as an example. And affordability along a whole range, including, obviously, owning a vehicle. This chart is based on the last. We can see movement here in terms of growth, and the lower density suburbs are growing the most. The furthest out are growing the most. We also have growth actually in higher density suburbs and small-sized metropolitan areas. And then what is really important to understand, and what we aren't getting, is that we also see growth, in these suburban areas and in the metropolitan area. Just that the growth in the metropolitan area is not as big as in the suburban. All right? What we have is the demographics underpinning this movement. If we take a look at it, we find, referring to the box up in the upper right-hand corner, we have high-end earning millennials, and I'm speaking of a period here coming out of 2010, 2011, up through 2016. High-end earning millennials, other millennials, that is the ones that weren't in their first job, making a lot of money, coming out of a recession. In fact, they were probably, many of them, unfortunately, not doing what they wanted to do. That's changing. We have older adults, and I love this definition of older, okay? Everybody's sitting down. Born before 1980. Okay. The point is they're in the family creation stage, okay? We have aging adults, that is, I had to pick some delineations here. Born before 1955, basically coming to or at the post-family ring stage, and we have the moderate income population of any group, okay? What happened in the current narrative is it was exaggerated. It only focused on one group, and a rather small one at that, the millennials who are high-end earning. And it forgot about the rest of the millennials and all the other groups that I just said. Another extremely important element of this structure, this business about the before 1980 older adults, guess what? Millennials grow up. What they were doing at 24 or 26, they are doing something different at age 33. Just have to give it enough time. 6, 7, 8 years. So we were trying to draw too many conclusions in a static analysis fashion based on minority, high-end earning millennials, rather than taking the whole demographic picture into account. We produced a white paper, PMRC did, in 2012, published in 2013 as the National Parking Association Parking Demand Report, which predicted this. It's published. We used the Yale University Masnick-Belsky model for permanent household creation, showing how that intersected with rise in car use. Basically, when family rearing or family creation stage begins in that station of life, things change. A permanent household definition is created, and lifestyle changes, daily activity change, and guess what? We could see car use rising dramatically. It's a very important factor, and we have to realize that we are in a dynamic situation. This is the growth rate perspective. I'm going to move on here because I've spent a lot. Last two dot points are what's important. These are all lookup numbers. Millennials are buying cars. If you take a look at the trend lines, they're going to be rising to about 40% of the market here in a couple of years. And if you look at those numbers, over a 5-year period, they will have bought 27 million new cars. Folks, this is new cars. Now, I'm going to tell you something shocking. Somebody in their first job actually might buy a used car. And so, when you add in the used car numbers, this just multiplies. There's many more millions of cars. The business about millennials and cars, that discussion's over. They're buying. Let's take a look quickly. This is from an important DOT report which sets a new baseline for our thinking. Put aside what you know, what you've heard, in terms of where we're going, and understand that we're growing in population dramatically. We will have, by 2045, 70 million more people. Okay, that is the new paradigm. And we just have to, it's not the answer to all of our questions, it's the starting point for the analysis. How does that play out? Private vehicles will remain, according to the feds, the primary mode of transportation. I'm going to go down to the fourth dot point. Overall driving will increase 19 to 29% in terms of road volume. Corresponding parking demand increase will be of a similar order of magnitude, about 20%. I want to point out in this chart, which is the work commute, and I want to point out that single vehicle occupancy use constitutes about 87% in each of these years in terms of the work commute, and about 13% in other modes. That has been stable actually for 37 years. It's going to be 40 years pretty soon. And so if we look at what's going on in terms of the upper right-hand corner, that is the other non-vehicle dependent part of the population. You can see the increases. Yes, indeed, there were increases at about 2.4 million, but there was a 5-to-1 increase in the same period of private vehicle use at those ratios. I'm being flagged by the chair to wrap it up. Take a look at the growth rates. And let's look at, and I'll take a question on this, and we should, but two aspects. Horizontally is a structure that's going to remain with us, that 87% versus 13% proportion of private vehicle use versus some other mode. That's going to stay. That's not going away. Vertically, look at the numbers rising. All groups are growing, folks. All groups are growing.
So, Dale, where's the 70 million growth in that?
70 million growth is gradually expressing itself in the rising numbers, but frankly, that's going to be evident starting in 2025 and later. Folks, parking demand is going to soar. These are hardwired demographics. Nothing's going away. Nothing's going to change on this. And I'm going to, out of courtesy to my panel partners, call that to be my last comment.
We'll come back to some questions on cybersecurity and stuff like that a little bit later. Brian, can you talk to us from the technology side?
Try, although Michael really put us to shame, didn't he? That was really impressive. Is Michael still in the room? Actually, I'll take the mic. That was spectacular. And the really good news is, over the last couple, 2 or 3 days, I'm beginning to see, and I'm sure you have too, that some common threads start to run through the conversation. That's what gives me hope that we're actually starting to form around good ideas to actually address smart cities and keep moving forward. So now let's build out. So I understand that Akshay used this picture as well. So we can get wrapped up in smart cities and we can worry about all the infrastructure and the cost and who's going to pay for it. At the end of the day, just like Dale just said, we still, the more things change, the more things stay the same, right? What's old is new. We still have to figure out how to put cars in garages or park cars in the most efficient way possible. And so I thought this was a great picture to sort of land us on, or to ground us in, why are we here? What are we doing, right? And then when I took a look at sort of the Smart City Development Index and you listened to what Michael Sherwood talked about, all of the things that he brought to light, and what jumped out at me from this picture is the cities are making operational investments. So they're working on collecting data from sensors, from carbon dioxide sensors and network traffic flow and park pictures and all of that. There's very little, or there's probably stuff going on in the garages, but in the end, we as the operators and as the folks that are closer to the garages, we have to worry about the garages and let the smart cities help us with the infrastructure to make the traffic flow better and to make ultimately the customer experience what our parking customers expect, and that is to remove all the friction and be able to go into a garage, pay for parking, and leave without having to stop 3 times, and I'll tell that story in just a second. But we got to focus on the user experience. So for as long as there have been cities, the cities that focus on the user experience, that transform the experience in the city win, right? So Gardens of Babylon, Roman Empire, or the Roman Cathedral, or the, thank you, the word. So Vegas benefits greatly from Hoover Dam, right? Who knew they were going to put a merry-go-round or a carousel in London, right? They're trying to transform the experience and bring people back, give them the experience that they're looking for around entertainment and around a smart city. So how are we doing? You know, the fact is that I go home and I tell my wife all the time that parking people are the nicest people on the planet. They're nicest people. But we're pretty guarded when it comes to sharing, and we're pretty guarded when it comes to collaborating. There's not a lot, we hold it pretty tight to the vest. I do too. I'm guilty as charged, right? We guard the data like we gate our facilities, and then some of us don't even, we know some of the data, but we don't have a lot of data. And so I'll tell you one story, and there are stories on the opposite end of the spectrum as well. But so in one of the facilities that we support today, from a Parker perspective, the customer can go online, they can reserve parking, pay for parking online. When they get to the facility, they have to pull a ticket because there's no scanner to scan either their phone or the confirmation of paper. So they pull a ticket, they go park, they come out, and when they leave, they have to push the help button and talk to our call center, and our call center takes their name, their ticket number, and their reservation, their confirmation, in order to get out. So parks, online reservations, monitoring, call center, right? That's pretty That's not so great. That's not a great user experience. And that's what's happening every day. So we've got work to do to take the friction out, but we got to work together to get it done. So let's just talk about some of the disruptors, and you saw it in spades, again, from the Vegas presentation. So the cloud, for the millennials in the room, they won't even get what I'm about to say, but gone are the days where you buy 3 times the capacity that you need, you put it in a data center or you put it in colo, you're guessing at the capacity, you buy way more than you need, and it goes obsolete before you can use even 1/3 of the capacity. The cloud gives us the ability to pay for exactly what we need, exactly at the right time, and it gives us all kinds of collaboration and automation tools on the back end to essentially make the complexity of the infrastructure free. Now, it's not free to buy the infrastructure, but if you think about all the people, and again, Michael talked about it, all the people and the labor that he has to employ, that's still 1/3 of probably what he would have to employ because he's using the cloud. It's just more powerful, and it eliminates a lot of the back end, the back office friction, but it's still not cheap. So again, you saw the analytics. Michael showed it in real time. I'm not sure I've got much more to add other than the fact that the cloud makes storage cheap. It gives you the ability to pull all kinds of data from different systems, mix it together to ultimately drive insight and data and action into, sending the police to the park because they can see that there's activity going on. That's what's coming. So then on the 5G front, I know Richard talked about this yesterday, and I think, well, I'm oversimplifying it, right? But the 5G front, there's really two ways that it's going to affect us. So of course, your phone is just going to get a lot faster, and it's going to be able to handle a lot more data. But the sensors that will begin talking to the network will be 5G sensors, and they'll be small, and the signal will be lightweight, such that you can put a battery in a sensor, it'll talk to the 5G network, and you'll be able to put sensors all over. I've heard a couple of times about the curb problem and who's parked at the curb and why they're parked at the curb. The sensors technology is just going to get better, cheaper, faster, and it will give us the ability to see a lot more information in real time that we don't do today. 5G will enable that. So again, Vegas talked about social disruption. So Facebook aside now, the ability for a city, a smart city, or a university to create trust will really be built on people talking to each other and telling each other about their experiences. That's how trust will get built, and that's how trust ultimately will drive our ability to share the data back and forth, right? And then we talked a lot about privacy and security. So as we get more connected, the real challenge will be that the weakest link could be the garage. And the garage, because it's connected, or the facility, because it's connected to the main network, is now the place where we're going to be a target. And Dale, I know that you were talking about, you had some concerns about the security and the network. You just comment on.
Oh, yeah, very briefly. The scenario, let's not jump to conclusions, but let's think. This is a thought process, an analytic process. Scenario, the Target retailer. 4 years ago, they were hit by hacking, a cyber attack, effectively, and tens of millions of 40 million accounts were compromised, customer data. You know how they got in? Through the air conditioning. Meaning, the air conditioning HVAC contractor that they had servicing their store had rights at the corporate level to access their system. The hacker figured it out and said, hey, I'm not trying to go through the front door. I'm going to do a side door or back door, however you want to put it. It was repeated. What's really scary is it was repeated in a much more serious fashion, we now know, from the federal government, Department of Homeland Security, on a state-to-state attack on the United States in 2016 by a foreign actor. Same business, came in through the side door.
Yeah, so the side doors are gonna have to get secured too. And I don't know about you, but I've been in, so we could do, Parker can still do a better job of securing even what we have. But I've been in several garages where, you know, the security is, it's going to need to be addressed, for sure. So here's my attempt at a call to action. So the smart city doesn't need to be big, urban, new. All cities can be smart cities. Sarah's going to talk about the universities and the Ohio State University and the changes she's making. But we've got to commit to transforming the experience, and that means we have to share and we have to collaborate. We have to open up and allow each other to see each other's data. And then once we've shared the data, then we can compete on a different plane. So the best example is the airlines all have the same information around the reservation system, I'm sure, with the exception of Southwest, right? So they compete in different ways, but they can all see the same data, the same information, the same schedules. We have got to get to the point where we're sharing. We have to share, because without sharing, we're going to remain on islands, and we're going to have moats around the business. So we have to build interoperability and convergence. APIs have to be table stakes. So how many in the room saw that or anticipated that Amazon would be in the grocery, healthcare, and mortgage business in 6 months? Anybody? Anybody see that coming? So we all know that parking is a really substantial business. How long before Amazon, I mean, I'm on a bit of a rant, right? But Google knows where I am. Google knows when I park my car. Google knows what the traffic patterns are. How long before Google does what we all should be doing together, and that is figuring out how to connect these systems and make them talk to each other so that we can create a better experience for the parker without it being taken away from us. I absolutely believe it's going to have to be public-private. The businesses want to invest, and the public infrastructure just doesn't have the capital to worry about parking the way we should be able to worry about it. So I'll end on the slide where Martin Luther King talks about, you know, the soft-minded is man always fears change, but everything we've ever wanted is on the other side of fear, right? So we've got to go from behind to be leaders. We've got to pull the wagon together. So, Bob. Or Sarah, here you go. What's up at Ohio State?
What's up at Ohio State? Where's the little clicker? Which button? This one?
Right one.
Got it. Okay. So what is Ohio State University doing? I find it kind of interesting that we talk about, on one hand, AVs are going to get rid of cars, and then there's all this technology out there, but they usually dump it in the lap of the parking folks to operationalize it, because we have a way of figuring out how to make things work. So there's a lot of things, I think, that OSU is doing. It is a city within a city. We have a population on campus of, I think, around 80,000 between the students and the faculty and staff, and that doesn't even include, we have about 100,000 when you add the patients and the visitors in. I have been told in the past by some of the traffic folks I worked with when I was on the Ohio State University side that our traffic volume is about the size of the city of Kalamazoo, Michigan. So we have a lot of people, a lot of things going on campus, and with that we try, and this was back in 08, 09, so many of you, if you don't know me, I used to work for the Ohio State University. In 2012, they privatized the parking, and now I crossed over to the dark side, and I work for the concessionaire as an asset manager for the parking. So we still run the parking. But we worked with a company back in 09. We wanted to get real-time bus information out to the customers. And so you've got to make life better for people in order to make your life easier and, I think, optimize some of your operations. So we've got a real-time bus information. It tells you when the next bus will arrive. It gives us all kinds of information for our customers, but more importantly, we partnered with the Department of Civil Engineering and Geodetic Science, because they are getting the back-end data from all of the bus riders. So we have automatic passenger counters, things like that, and they're using that in their class to teach the students. So the students get something, the university gets something. It is all about the data, as Brian was talking about, and they're using that to try to fine-tune the system. So if the buses are bunching, if we have too many people on the bus and we need to spread it out, that gives us that opportunity. The parking side, in 2012, we transitioned over to a private entity. We needed a quick win. And the quickest win we could think of was, let's put the occupancy of our garages out on the website for people to tell. Because we have, as many universities do, a hunting license. You pay a lot of money for your parking permit. It gives you the license to hunt and go find a space. And so faculty and staff would call and say, I drove through 4 garages and I couldn't find a parking space and I wasted all this time. So now what we have in that middle section there is what we call our garage tracker, which you can look on. It gives you an approximate. It's about every 5-minute update that's hooked into our parking gates. And it tells people if they can have a chance of finding a space in the garage. And it has been probably the best thing we ever did. And now, actually, interestingly, the university they moved a high maintenance population. We have a medical center on campus. And they moved a lot of the nurses from a proximate parking lot out to a remote lot because they were moving a road on campus. And they said, oh my God, we got to have occupancy. You know, these people are going to go crazy. And so they used the gate technology that we're using in the parking gates in the surface lot to get occupancy. It's not perfect. We don't have lane delineators. We do need to go through and count, but it's close enough, and it makes people feel better when they drive in and see it's a 78% occupancy. They know they've got a space. We have all started, of course, tweeting information, and that's kind of a double-edged sword because it's an insatiable appetite. People, you know, what do you send out? How many resources do you dedicate it? You don't want to be annoying, but you also want to be informative, and so we're still trying to balance all of that. But we're also looking at quite a few other things. I got to walk over here because I can't read that real well, and you guys may not be able to either. But the approach, these are things that we are on our list of things to explore that are going to take a little bit of time. So connecting garage entrance exit data with traffic signals. We tried to do this. Sharing data is critical, and we wanted to do that, but it's sometimes harder than you think it is. So we contacted the university and the city of Columbus, who actually helps oversee some of the traffic signals, and said, gee, we have garage entrance exits, and you have traffic data on campus. If we can merge that, we might be able to help mitigate some of the traffic. And they said, yeah, well, the equipment's old, it's outdated, and it doesn't capture any data. So it's still on the wish list, and hopefully if they ever update, we'll get there. The real-time response to issues, like late or no-show bus, favorite garage filling. So we have this same high-maintenance population out on the West Campus are angry if the bus doesn't show up at the 3rd minute. They're providing 3-minute headways at peak hour, which is absolutely amazing. But, you know, people don't want to ride the bus, and so if that bus isn't there at the 3rd minute, they're angry. So they want a place to text and say, hey, that bus didn't come, or the driver passed me by, or the usual for those of you in transit, the driver smiled, waved at me, and drove right by. So they're looking at a way to do that. That technology's there, but implementing it with the existing phone technology on campus. I mean, a lot of this stuff, there's all technology out there, but if you don't have a budget to just totally redo everything, I mean, I thought the Las Vegas presentation was amazing. I was going to ask about the budget and then heard a lot of it were pilot projects. So the question becomes, how do you implement this if you don't have a pilot and you don't have the budget? Let's see, what was the other one? Integrated wayfinding. So how cool would it be if you get to campus, you have signs, and this is out there, but we just don't have it on campus and we don't have the money right now to do it. Tells you where the next garage is, how many spaces are available. Oh, by the way, there's a couple of events on campus. You might want to avoid this lot. You may want to go other places. Those are sort of things that we could do to reduce traffic on campus, direct people to where they want to go, eliminate their frustration. The programmable message boards can do the same thing, and the garages even, you know, heads up, here's what's happening today. If you want to stop by so-and-so's coffee shop, you know, we can sell advertising on there. We don't want to be obnoxious about it, but we would like to put those in. We'd love to run them with solar. So those have been projects that we've been looking at. The ride hailing and using the electric vehicles for intercampus mobility. So there's a big push in Columbus, I'll talk about it in a minute, to electrify Columbus, put in more electrical charging stations, get more EVs. There's a big grant that the city got to do that. And again, it's all trying to reduce how much driving. And so we have a Park Once philosophy on campus, but people need to go back and forth all the time. So how do you do that so that they don't lose their parking space and you don't have unnecessary driving? And then replacing the in-lane attendants with video technology. So, you know, we've got a requirement in the med center where we have to have an attendant out there to help patients and visitors if they need to get out. Equipment is great, it really works well, but people sometimes don't understand it, and sometimes things happen. Something jams, the dollar bill's wet if they stick it in the machine. So we think we can do that better and faster and much more reliably with video technology, where we have an attendant there, they're just not having to be standing there. And then we've got people on the ground, obviously, that can run and help in between. So the SMART goals, you know, the City of Columbus, I should have been the city. Anybody here from the City of Columbus before I say anything else? I thought Las Vegas did a great job of doing what I think, in my mind, a smart city is. So Columbus is struggling a little bit. You know, they've got the DOT grant, they've got this Vulcan grant for electrification, and they've retooled. You know, they started down a path, and then they've kind of retooled where they're going with this. So they've gone back and said, wait, where do we start? And so really it's with an operating system that can take the data. And so we've got a neutral party, the Columbus Collaborative, that is sort of going to be the repository for the data. And I think that's not a bad place to start, because that's really where everything needs to build. The next thing they're looking at, and the university is as well, and these I would say are university goals. Campus Parc, which is the entity I work for now, will participate in some of these. You know, this whole the idea of a common payment, which one-stop shop, great. Just don't know if it has to be a common payment. It could be a bunch of different payments in a common portal. And so that's kind of what we're looking at in our world, to try to figure out how do we make it easy for people to figure out how to pay for the services. The multimodal trip planning. So the City of Columbus has a bus rapid transit route that they're putting out there, and they want to have kiosks at the different stops so people who get off the bus can stop and figure out where else they can take their first mile, last mile trip. Not bad. I mean, I think that's actually pretty easy to do, and I think that's going to help some people. But again, it's all back to smart cities. I don't think always mean public transit. I think there's enough people, enough evidence that shows people will be in cars, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of searching other than common payment mode or find your parking space. The event traffic and parking management certainly needs help. They're looking at, again, this is more find a parking space is what it turned into. We're thinking of the real-time information for customers. So, you know, and a lot of this, again, is out there. So pre-purchase your parking, it'll direct you to the parking lot that you need to go to. You don't have to worry about finding a space or hunting. It might make life easier for the traffic officers in the road that are running that. And then, again, the use of electric vehicles and everything I've seen. I mean, I think pollution is real. We get more cars on the road, we're going to have a bigger problem with it. And so I think electrifying vehicles is not a bad idea, but our grid's nowhere close to being able to take it. And then what gets in the way is figuring out, is that my reserve space? Then do I have to pay extra for it? What are the rules around it? How do you make that work? And that still is being tossed around. We have not gotten that resolved, but that is a goal. And then, of course, less known are the autonomous vehicles. I think if you don't have, put my university hat back on, if you don't say you're looking out for that stuff, you're just not being progressive. You have to have it on there. And then the truck platooning is interesting. Columbus has a lot of distribution hubs, and so the trucks and the merchandise is causing a lot of traffic congestion, so they're looking at ways to try to mitigate that. I think one of the things that is informally happening is sort of looking at the desired outcomes. And I think that's a piece sometimes that is missed as we start applying technologies. What are we trying to do, and what's the value? And so we put this chart together. This was not the city or the university, but we're sort of saying, you know, I think the three things: carbon reduction is real. Everybody wants to do that. Enhancing the experience for your customer is common sense. And then, you know, accommodate the city and the university growth, because both of those are growing significantly in Columbus. And just finally, you know, the technology considerations. There is a lot of stuff out there, and it's hard to pick and choose. And so these are really the three things that we measure it against in Campus Park. You know, it's got to be sustainable. How do you, because everything we know about technology is that in 5 years it's going to be a lot different. So how do you continue to start something and then continue with that as the technology emerges? It's got to be scalable. You may start small, you may start with a pilot, but then how do you grow it? How do you take something that's really, really cool, like in Las Vegas, and put it in a small city so that it makes sense financially and through applications, and then, you know, adaptable, because the only thing we all know is things are going to change. There's going to be a new service that's needed. And so just sitting down and looking at those, you know, the outcomes of these are, as you automate more things, you have people that you need to either find another career for or train them. You know, it's really unrealistic to expect that you can automate and still keep all the same number of people, because that's usually, in most of our cases, the majority of the cost. So how do you deal with the ethical and the social conditions with that are all things that we're looking at.
Okay, that kind of wraps up what we've got. We tried to give you a glimpse of what the research community is telling us, tried to give you a glimpse at what technology looks like today, and then tried to look at a city example with the university in terms of what they've done. We're prepared to answer any questions you might have. Seeing no questions, thank you very much. Appreciate it.